My name is Astrid Lovelace, and I'm the Sector Networks Manager for ACCA UK. We're delighted to be able to welcome the founder of Career Codex Limited, Simon Gray, this afternoon. Simon is a former professional recruiter, an accountant and entrepreneur. As a consultant and then founding director of his own recruitment business, he has extensive experience on the front line, acting for both Jobseeker and employer. After many years in the recruitment industry, he realized that the best way to help those looking for a new job or career change was not to find them a job himself, but to empower them with the right education and training to manage their career both now and in the future. Simon's presentation will last for approximately 40 minutes, after which there will be time for questions. Please do take the time to visit our resource centre, where you will find links to Simon's website, our careers website, and links to our online and training courses through our ACCA X platform. Just as a reminder, questions will be taken at the end, and the slides will be sent to you after the event. We hope that you enjoy the presentation, and I will hand you over to Simon.
Thank you very much, Astrid. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today at ACCA HQ in London, and welcome to everybody on the line from wherever you're dialing in from today. Today's presentation is all about strategies for success in the job market, and it's going to show you how the job market really works and how to position yourself to stand out from the crowd, because that's the way you get hired. So today, as Astrid said, we're going to run for about 40 minutes in terms of the formal presentation, and then I'll be delighted to answer any questions that you have at the end. So please, as we go through, make a note of any questions, and if you'd like to follow me on Twitter at @CareerCodex, that's CODEX, and ask questions on there. If we don't get time to cover those questions today, what I'll do, I'll pick those up later. So today we're going to cover three things, and the first thing we're going to cover is why your CV or resume is no longer enough to find success in the job market. And in doing that and explaining that, I'm going to talk about the 4 stages of successful job search. Now, I've been in the recruitment game for a long time. I'm no longer in the recruitment game, but even with my current business, Career Codex, one of the things I'm asked all the time first off is, can you help me with my CV? And the answer, of course, to that is yes. But in actual fact, as you'll find out by the end of this webinar, that's actually the wrong question to ask when you come onto the job market, because there are 3 things that you need to consider before ever putting pen to paper or finger to keyboard to write your CV. Second thing we're going to cover today is how the job market really works and what this means to you, and how with this knowledge you can stand out from your competition, which is other job seekers competing for the job that you want. And then finally, linked to the second element of today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you about how to access what I call the hidden market. Now, the hidden market is where a high proportion of high probability job opportunities exist that the majority never see. And the majority never see these opportunities because they're not advertised. They're not in the public domain, but they do exist. And having spent 10 years in the recruitment industry, I can tell you that before I ever got a job to recruit or to work on a job for a client, quite often that client or that employer had been into the hidden market to try and find talent directly before they came to me. So we'll talk about that as well today. So I wanted you to take probably about 10, 20 seconds just to think about why you're here today, because there's a reason you decided to come onto today's webinar. And what I would say about today's content is that whatever level you're at in terms of seniority, whatever your industry sector, the content is relevant. And it's relevant whether you're looking for a new job within your current discipline and current industry sector, or whether you're looking for a complete change of career. So you might be in finance currently, but perhaps you're looking to move into more of a general management role. Or you might be in the aerospace sector and want a role in financial services. That's what we call career change. And career change, it's more difficult because people tend to hire you on the basis of what you've done previously. But career change using the techniques and the advice I'm going to give you today is absolutely possible. Now, this is the first time many of you will have come across my business and come across me, and I always think it's important that the presenter on any webinar introduces themselves, gives a bit of background, just so you know who you're listening to, and why some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today actually works and is a proven strategy for finding success in the job market. As Astrid explained at the start of the presentation, I am an accountant, qualified accountant, and I qualified back in 2000. I then went into the recruitment industry. For 6 years, I worked as a consultant in a recruitment company. And then in September 2008, you might remember that date from the financial crisis, I decided I would start my own recruitment company, my own recruitment business, which I worked in that business for 5 years. And what I started to observe in my own recruitment company was that people would come into my office and they'd be looking for a job. And I couldn't always help these people because I didn't have all the jobs, and no recruitment company can ever claim to have all of the jobs. And when I asked people, why are you in my office? What are you looking for? What else are you doing in the job market apart from talking to me? It was very clear that there was a real lack of knowledge, even at the most senior level. People have been through the job market a number of times, about how the job market really works and about some of the things people could do individually to charter their own ship and to actually go out there and proactively find the job that they wanted. So I decided I'd write a book, as you do, and I wrote my first book, Super Secrets of the Successful Jobseeker. And people started to use this to, as well as using my recruitment services, they started to use this to position themselves differently in the job market and started to ask me to coach them. So in 2013, I set my own company up, left my recruitment business, set my own company up called Career Codex. And what I do now is I work with clients on a private one-to-one basis, and I also do some group coaching to help people define, find, and then secure the job they really want, not necessarily just the job they've seen advertised. And last year now, I wrote my second book, Super Secrets of Successful Executive Job Search. And both books now are doing very well on Amazon. The latest book now, I believe, has about 25 five-star reviews. So at the end of the presentation, that might be something you want to go out and check out. So let's talk a little bit about why people fail in the job market. And there are probably 5 key reasons that I've observed over the years as to why people don't find the success that they deserve. And the first one I've mentioned already, and that's that they place too much focus on their CV. And as I've said already, the first thing people think about when they come on the job market is their CV or resume. And what I used to find selling my recruitment company is that a candidate would register with me, and if I hadn't found them a position within a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, they'd send me a new version of their CV. They'd make a little amend, a little tweak, in the inaccurate belief that little change would actually be the magic pill that would get them the job that they wanted. And it rarely was. Because successful job search is not about CV. CV is only a really, really small part of it, but people can become CV or resume obsessed and think that that's the key to their success, which inevitably it isn't. The second reason people fail in the job market is because they do what everyone else is doing. And if you talk to anybody in the careers and employability space and ask for their advice as to what to do to get the job you want, they'll talk about this thing called standing out. So how do you stand out? Well, you stand out by observing what other people are doing, your competition for the job you want, and doing something differently. Because if you follow the herds, that can never be standing out. So the temptation is when people come into the job market, they look at what their peer group's doing, they look at what they read about how they should find a job in the press or the media or whatever else, and they do what everyone else is doing. But in actual fact, what you should be doing is some of that, but also doing stuff that other people aren't prepared to do or don't know how to do. So, I talk a lot about job boards and professional recruiters. You absolutely should use these vehicles, but there is a lot more stuff you can and should be doing, which I'll talk about today. Third thing is it's an alien environment. So you've been in a situation, let's imagine you've been made redundant, and suddenly you're at home. You've not got surround of the people that you've worked with previously. You've not got that support mechanism. Job search, whether you've been made redundant or whether you're actually in a job at the moment and looking for a new job, is generally a lonely pursuit. It's something you do on your own. And it's a profession in itself. It's a skill set in itself. And to be successful at job search, you have to acquire those skills. And probably the most important point as to why people fail in the job market due to this alien environment is because it's personal. And what happens to you in the job market is personal. It's not about your business. if something happens negatively at work, well, it's happening to the business or the organization that you work for. But if you're not finding the success that you want in the job market as quickly as possible, well, that's a personal, or can be seen as a personal attack on you. And as a result, it can be a very emotional place. And I'll talk about this when we talk about psychology a little bit later on. Fourth thing is that there's no system for success. Now in business, I run a couple of my own businesses, ran my own business previously. You have a business plan, and you write your business plan so you know where you're going and you know the steps along the way. But when it comes to the job market, people tend to leave their fortunes to other people, and they have no plan. They've not defined the job they want, and they've not put a plan in place to go out there and get it. And finally, frustration and confusion, and something I call the downward spiral. Because for me, there is no static ground, no static state in life. You're either on an upward spiral or a downward spiral. And both are self-fulfilling and self-fueling. So if you think about a day that you have, in the office, you have a great day. And isn't it funny, on a great day, everything goes well. But on a bad day, everything seems to go wrong. And it's exactly the same in the job market. So the Career Codex methodology and the concept that I'm going to share with you today is about getting you on an upward spiral and keeping you there to take consistent action, consistent positive action in the job market. Let's have a little word from Einstein, shall we? And this is probably my favorite quote of all time, which says that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And this is extremely applicable to the job market, because insanity in the job market is doing the same things as everyone else and expecting to be the one to get hired. I've talked about standing out already. Well, if you're doing the same thing as everybody else, that can never, ever, ever be standing out. So let's talk about the framework for success. And the Career Codex methodology has 4 stages to finding success in the job market. Stage 1 is environment. Stage 2 is psychology. Stage 3 is planning. And stage 4 is process, the 8 steps to success. Now, I've mentioned this already. When most people come onto the job market, the first thing they think about is stage 4. And stage 4 starts with putting a CV together. But Career Codex says, well, okay, to find real success in the job market, you have to take 3 steps back to put the foundations in place for a successful job search. And I'm going to walk you through environment, psychology, and planning. And then in more detailed content, we're going to talk about environment today and how understanding the job market environment can help you position yourself correctly in the job market. So let's touch on environment. Let's touch on this at a global level. Environment is about how the job market works. It's about who the key players are and understanding what their motivations are and how they think and act. Because if you can understand the motivations of the people in the job market, then you've got a good idea and a good understanding as to how to position yourself in a different space to them, or how to interact with them in the most positive way. And some of the players in the job market, well, of course, are the job seekers. These are the people competing for the job you want. So I've already said, you've got to look at what they're doing and position yourself in a different way to stand out from the competition. There are employers, and employers are out there looking for talent. These are direct players, job seekers and employers, who ultimately come together when a placement is filled. But then you have what I call intermediaries, and these are professional recruiters or headhunters, and also market makers. Now, market makers is a term I've coined, and essentially what a market maker is somebody with a network in the space that you operate in. So it could be somebody who runs a networking group in your industry sector. These are people who can connect you to people that could potentially hire you. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but just recognize for the moment, job seekers, employers, recruiters, and market makers are critical people in the job market to understand their behaviors so that you can position yourself in the right way. Next, let's talk about psychology. And when people ask me what's the most important thing to find success in the job market, it's psychology. Because psychology will keep you doing stuff you need to do. The right psychology will keep you doing stuff you need to do to find success in the job market, but the wrong psychology and the wrong mindset will stop you dead in your tracks. And your beliefs impact your thoughts and ultimately impact the action you're prepared to take in the job market. And when I work with my private clients, one of the things we do first off is we challenge pre-existing beliefs, because your current beliefs may be disempowering. If you believe the job market is a very difficult place, where there's lots of competition, and where your skill set maybe isn't as good as somebody else's, well, you'll believe that, so you'll think it, and as a result, you're probably not going to take enough action to actually get the job you want. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But what about if you believe that the job market was a good place, it was full of opportunity, you thought this, and as a result of some techniques and some strategies, you started to take deliberate proactive action, well, that would become a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, because you would ultimately find the job you want. And the analogy I like to use here with psychology is to say, well, your brain is like one big search engine. It's like Google. And if you think negative thoughts, then you get negative results. If you think positive thoughts based on positive beliefs, then you get positive results in life. So one of the most important things to change in terms of your behavior in the job market is how you talk to yourself. You know, what's that little voice in your head saying about you and your performance in the job market? And one of the things I get my private one-to-one clients to do is to complete what I call a thinking journal, which is where they write down all of the activity they're doing in the job market, and then more importantly, what that means to them, what meaning they're attaching, because that brings out into the open some subconscious disempowering thoughts into their conscious mind where they can make a change. Next is planning. And I've talked about in business, you have a business plan, you know where you're going, and you follow this plan to get the end result. Well, it's exactly the same in the job market, albeit people tend not to plan properly. And there are three elements to planning, really. First reason to plan, it gives you focus. If you know what you want, you're more likely to go out there and find what you want. And the analogy I would use, if you're going away for the weekend and you get in the car and drive, well, the chances of ending up where you want to end up are pretty slim. But if you plug something into the sat-nav, the direction of travel where you want to get to, well, you might take a few twists and turns, but you're probably going to end up there in the end. And the second element of planning is communication. And one of my bugbears as a professional recruiter would be the person who came into my office, and when I asked them what kind of opportunity they were looking for, they couldn't tell me. You know, said, "Oh, I can do anything. You know, I might do a bit of this, I might do a bit of that." They were unclear, so they couldn't convince me they were serious about what it is they wanted to do. And what I knew then is if I put them in front of one of my clients, an employer, they'd probably be the same, and they wouldn't be able to convince the employer that they were the person for the job. So being very clear and direct about what it is you want helps you to get your message across clearly and concisely to those people who can help you. And finally, probably the most important, or one of the most important elements of planning is discipline, because it's unlikely you'll find a job. If you come onto the job market today, it's unlikely you'll find a job tomorrow. And you need to take consistent action over a period of time to achieve the result that you want. And that requires discipline, because there'll be days where you think, you know, I don't feel like it today, or you'll get a knockback. And you've got to keep going, you've got to keep going, you've got to keep going. And that's down to discipline. So the work I do with my clients in terms of their planning, we come up with what's called a destination statement. This is where they're going. It defines the organization, the role, and the location of the opportunity that they want. And we put in we devise an action plan. This is the action that people will take to deliver that result. And the focus is very much on having this plan, having this destination always front of house in your mind, but on a day-to-day basis, focusing on the process of getting there rather than the prize. And the analogy I would use is this. Any of you on the line today who go to the gym, you'll notice in January that the gyms are full. My gym's still fairly full, although it's getting quieter. And people sign up because they want to lose weight, improve their physique or whatever else. And they go to the gym, session one, they get on the scales or they look in the mirror. They're not quite feeling as good as they thought they should. So they go back a second time, a third time. And because they've not achieved the result within that short period of time, then they tend to quit. But if they just have focused on the process of going to the gym and doing the exercises, and they'd done it for long enough within a realistic timescale, they would have achieved the result. And it's exactly the same in the job market. And having a realistic timescale and then turning up on a daily basis to advance your fortunes in the job market is what it's all about. And then finally, we come on to the process. So the process element is the things people normally recognize when we talk about job search. And the 8 steps to success are, well, CV, cover letter, how to write an impactful cover letter, how to get in front of decision makers to get their attention, which normally isn't knocking on the door saying you're looking for a job. And there's something I call the Jobseeker dichotomy, which if we have time, I'll talk about a little bit later on this webinar. Interviews, how to control the interview process from start to finish, because you can't guarantee that the person who's interviewing you will ask you the right questions for you to be able to demonstrate your skills and experience for the job you're there interviewing for. Particularly if it's a senior role, the person who's interviewing you, may interview once every 2 years. So my whole methodology for interview and approaching the interview is to go in there knowing what you need to communicate to influence that person's decision so that they walk out of that interview with a gut feel that says, this is the person I need to hire. Of course, we live in the age of the internet. We're delivering this through the internet today. You have to have an online strategy. So what is your online strategy saying about you, and how are you positioning yourself in the job market? Professional networking. Market makers I've touched on, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But you have to be out there physically in the world, as well as online in the internet space, networking with people who can help you find the job you want. Step 7 is about innovation, so looking at what others are doing and then thinking about what you can do differently, using technology to advance your fortunes in the job market. And then finally, having got to the offer and negotiation stage, how do you secure the right offer? How do you negotiate the best deal after all your hard work finding and then being offered the job that you want? So I'm going to talk about environment. So stage 1, this is probably the most important stage because it sets the scene. And I'm going to talk about the 3 conversations that employers have when they think about coming onto the job market to hire. But first of all, let's get into an employer's head. And I've spent 10 years talking to employers, so I know this to be factual. When employers have to recruit, it's often a painful process. And it's a painful process because it distracts them from doing their day job. It's also fraught with uncertainty because the way people tend to make a decision on a candidate is through an interview process. And, it's a first interview, a second interview process, maybe some psychometric testing. But you never really know who you're hiring until they turn up on day 1 and start to perform the job. So employers can be quite nervous about hiring the wrong person, and sometimes that can mean that they take quite a while to make a decision or don't actually hire at all. And then finally, there's a cost element. There's a cost in terms of their time, the opportunity cost of their time, but also there's a cost if they need to pay a fee to advertise on a job board, or probably a bigger fee if they go out and talk to a professional recruiter or a headhunter. So what an employer will do, and if you're on the line today and have employed people and hired people, hopefully this will resonate with you, is they have 3 conversations. The first thing they do is they go out to their peer group. People that they've trained with, people that they know at their level in the industry, and ask, well, who do you know? If they get no result, they go out to their extended network, maybe to their auditors, to their legal advisors, to people in the networking group they belong to, and say, I've got this opportunity. Do you know anyone? Can you recommend anyone? If they get nowhere then, what they do is they go out to recruiters and job boards, to third parties to say, look, I've got this opportunity. Can you help me find this person? So conversations 1 and 2, which is the peer group conversation and then the extended network conversation, this is what I call the hidden market. So if your strategy in the job market is only to register with job boards and only to register with professional recruiters, you're missing out on conversations 1 and 2, where a high proportion of high probability opportunities exist. And a high probability because you tend to have been recommended, and because you've tended to be recommended, there's usually very, very few people in the process alongside you. So let's talk about that hidden market, conversations 1 and 2. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see what the majority do in the job market. So they register on job boards, they register with professional recruiters. Now, I'm not saying don't do this, let's be clear on that. I'm saying do this, but don't make this all you do. The grey line in the middle is what people tend not to see because they don't know the hidden market exists and they don't know how to access it. But going to the hidden market, where high probability and a high volume of opportunity exists, is where the minority fish for the job they want. And this involves two things. It involves going direct to employers, and it involves leveraging market makers. So in going direct to employers, having done your planning and having defined the job that you want in your destination statement, you then can look at the local geography that you defined as where you want to find that job and look at who the employers are and approach them directly. Now, you might think, well, that's quite difficult. Well, yes, it can be, depends on your beliefs. But because you may think it's difficult, the majority probably think it's difficult, and that's exactly why you should do it, because that helps you to stand out. And in terms of market makers, knowing who key people in the marketplace are, your industry sector that you should be talking to, who get asked all the time, who do you know, who do you know, who do you know, leveraging and building a conversation with them and a relationship with them over time will allow them to recommend you when opportunities come along in conversations 1 and 2. Now, I'm actually a market maker because one of the things I do is I run a business networking group, and I represent 230 business organizations up in the East Midlands. And I'm a prime candidate for somebody to approach who is looking for a job in the East Midlands area. But it rarely happens. But if somebody did approach me and built a relationship with me who was looking for a job, well, I get asked all the time, who do I know, who can I recommend? So really leveraging the power of market makers is a thing that most people don't do, but is a very, very powerful tool to find the job you want. So as you can see, on the left-hand side of the screen, relying solely on job boards and professional recruiters is reactive. You lack control. You place your CV and you wait. And that's where frustration can sometimes set in. By taking proactive action, doing what the minority do, in addition to what the majority do, then this puts you in a very proactive place where you're in total control of your job search. And I'm going to share a quick story with you now, which will hopefully reinforce why you should think about doing stuff on the right-hand side of the screen to access the hidden market. So I did a series of podcasts recently about successful job search, and as part of that, I interviewed two finance directors and a senior recruitment consultant from one of the big international recruitment businesses. And the conversation with the finance directors in these businesses was really insightful, because I asked them, does anybody ever approach you directly? And they both said to me, well, no, never happens. And I said, well, what would happen if somebody approached you directly and they had relevant skills and experience and they approached you in a professional way, the right way? What would you do? And they said, well, we'd probably be quite pleased. We'd probably meet them. I said, would you meet them even if you didn't have a job? They said, well, yeah, we probably would, because we realize now, in a competitive world for talent, we've got to meet people not necessarily when we're hiring, we've got to meet people when they're available. So that tells you something. Two senior finance directors in two big businesses told me that, if somebody approached them directly in the right way, they would meet them, even if they didn't have a job. So that hopefully will reinforce your beliefs or change your beliefs about, well, yes, you can approach an employer directly, even if they're not advertising a position. And one of the big belief-changing things I go through with my clients who I work with on a one-to-one basis is, they often say to me, well, I can't approach a business that's not hiring. There's no advert on the website for an opportunity relevant to me. And I say to them, well, that's exactly why you should do it. Because what if the chief executive or the HR director in that business is having conversations 1 and 2 with their peer group and extended network? You get ahead of the competition, you approach them the right way, suddenly you could find yourself in front of a decision maker and be in a position where you can create, in part, your own opportunity. So let's talk a little bit more about this hidden market. And one of the great ways and the accessible ways to access the hidden market is using social media, and using LinkedIn in particular. Now, the internet has changed the landscape for everybody, because suddenly anybody and everybody has become accessible. And if you have a LinkedIn profile online and you leverage that LinkedIn profile properly, you can pretty much reach any decision maker in any business, in any organization that you want to, providing you do it in the right way. Now, LinkedIn, I'm going to talk specifically about LinkedIn, but there are other social media platforms that are still important for job search, but LinkedIn is the primary one. LinkedIn now is essentially an extended database for recruiters. Because what recruiters used to do, and when I first came into the industry, what we would do, we would put out adverts all the time to try and attract candidates to register with our business, to stock our shelves of candidates that would be relevant for our clients, our employers. But what recruiters can do now, when they have a specific vacancy, they can go into the marketplace and search on LinkedIn and find passive talent. So people who maybe aren't actively looking in the job market, haven't put their hand up and said, you know what, I'm looking for a job, but have the right skills and experience for a particular client vacancy that they're dealing with. And employers previously, when I first came into the recruitment industry, would have to rely on job boards, would have to rely on recruitment companies. But now, what they can do through LinkedIn, if they have a LinkedIn presence, they can go out and search for talent directly. So they can access the hidden market directly without ever going to a job board or without ever going to a professional recruiter. They have access to the database that other people have. And this is why it's very, very important to be on LinkedIn. And I'll give you a real life example. There was a client that I used to recruit for on a regular basis, big PLC client up in the Midlands. And when their resourcing manager used to come to me and say, Simon, we'd like you to go out and recruit this position, he would also say to me at the same time, by the way, our resourcing team are using LinkedIn to try and find this person too. So I was already in competition with my client to fill that vacancy. So that just shows you that, the bigger companies are definitely doing this, and increasingly smaller businesses are doing it too as they build a LinkedIn presence, because it's low cost, it's instantaneous, it's quick, and it's not just about who's on the job market, it's about being able to find the right candidate, whether they're looking or not. And the whole LinkedIn thing was really one of the catalysts for my first book, Super Secrets of the Successful Jobseeker, because I would have people coming into my office on a regular basis, and as part of the conversation, having talked through the CV, I would say to them, so are you on LinkedIn? And probably about 80 to 90% of them would say yes. And I'd say to them, so what are you doing on there? And they'd look at me and say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, what are you doing proactively on LinkedIn? And 90% of them weren't doing anything proactive. They created a profile and it sat there. But LinkedIn is not like that. You have to work it, you have to leverage it, you have to use it on a daily basis to get the most from it. And there are two elements to using LinkedIn properly to access the hidden market. And the first element is what I call the shop window. So you have to dress your shop window accordingly with to attract the kind of employer that you want to work for. And this goes back to your planning, your destination statement that you've put together. So you highlight the relevant skills and experience that you have to attract an employer to, using the analogy, come into your shop and speak to you about an opportunity. But what happens if the employer that you want to work for doesn't find your profile, doesn't walk past your shop and walk in? Well, this is where the most important element of LinkedIn comes into play, because you have to use LinkedIn as what I call a proactive engagement tool to go out and talk to the employers that you want to work for directly. So to use the shop analogy or the storefront analogy again, this is when your customer doesn't walk into your store, you actually go out onto the street and find them and invite them to come in to talk to you. And the majority of people that I work with in the recruitment space didn't really know how to use LinkedIn proactively. And even as LinkedIn's become more popular, quite a lot of my clients, when they first come to me, they're not really using LinkedIn proactively. And I'm going to tell you a very, very quick story about how I used LinkedIn proactively in my recruitment company to find somebody I never would have found to fill a vacancy with a business I was recruiting for. And I got given a job. It's the same PLC client. They gave me an internal audit position. It was an IT audit position, and they were really difficult to find. So I went onto LinkedIn and I found a group for IT auditors, because LinkedIn has groups, and groups are collections of people with a similar interest who work in a similar industry sector. And I put a post on there that said, I'm recruiting for an IT auditor. Position is based in the East Midlands. Can anyone help? Does anyone know anyone? Is there anybody that anyone can recommend to me? And a recruitment consultant who worked in a different space to me, not in the finance recruitment space, actually in the IT space, messaged me back pretty quickly and gave me 5 names. And these 5 names I then connected to directly on LinkedIn and said, you've been recommended as somebody who might be interested in a job that I have. Can we have a conversation? And to cut a long story short, one of the guys that responded to me, I think 2 out of the 5 responded, this guy called Neil. I met with Neil. He wasn't on the job market at the time. He wasn't actively looking. He wasn't actively looking at job boards. He wasn't actively registered with recruiters. But we had a conversation. I put him forward to my client, and he got the job, and he's been there 5 years. So that just shows as a recruiter how recruiters are using LinkedIn to find passive talent that's not necessarily registered with their organization, how employers are using LinkedIn. But flipping that over to your situation, if there are particular businesses that you want to work for, well, you can connect directly to those businesses and have a conversation with somebody senior in that organization, providing you do it in the right way. So I wanted to talk very quickly about how you build a presence on LinkedIn and really your visibility on LinkedIn to be able to see people you want to connect with, and also for them to be able to see you comes down to connections. So the more connections you have, the more visible you are. So what I do on a daily basis is I probably connect to 3 or 4 people, and I use a personal message to do it. I have a reason for connecting, and that builds my presence and my profile on LinkedIn. And there are first tier, second tier, and third tier connections on LinkedIn. And of course, first tier connections are very, very powerful. So I think I have about 4,500 connections on LinkedIn. So if you're on the call today, we've had a conversation, you want to connect to me to see how I've built my LinkedIn profile. If you search my name, Simon Gray, Gray, I'll be very happy to connect to you. And of course, it's another way for you to ask me a question after today is over. So think about building connections on a daily basis. Think about how you're positioning your shop window on LinkedIn. And then think about how you could leverage the power of groups to access market makers, or how you could go direct to some of the employers that you would like to work for in a professional way with a personal message to start a conversation for the future, which may not turn into a job today, but could turn into a conversation about a job opportunity further down the line. I want to talk to you now about something I call the hire cycle. And the hire cycle really stems from how marketing in general has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. And if you think about how advertising has tended to work, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and certainly with the bigger organizations, it still works this way to a certain extent, is people would put an advert out there, and then they would expect people to buy. So I put an advert out, I expect somebody to buy my product or buy my service. But we've all got used to all of these advertising messages. They're all over the place. And you turn on the television, there's advertising. You've got an email account, there's advertising dropping into your email inbox day in, day out. You listen to the radio, there's advertising. So what we've all done is we've all learned to filter this out. And because we're bombarded with these advertising messages, we've decided, well, we're just going to switch off from these advertising messages. And what that stops is even the stuff that would be relevant to us, that we would find interesting, sometimes doesn't get through. And one of the mistakes that people make in the job market in their approach is when they talk to an employer, when they talk to a recruiter, when they talk to a market maker, when they talk to their peers, they make it all about them. They bombard these people with, I'm looking for a job, can you help me, can you help me, can you help me? And they expect an instantaneous result. So I tell somebody today I'm looking for a job, well, I want them to help me find a job. But it doesn't work like that. And people switch off from that. And people switch off from that because if you knock on an employer's door and say to them, I'm looking for a job, and you expect them to hire you instantaneously, well, why would they? They may not have a job at the moment. They don't know who you are. You've not necessarily built engagement or trust with them. So the hire cycle now, which is based on the advertising cycle that you see all around you, is something called see me, like me, trust me, hire me, or for the advertising world, it's buy me. So what you have to think about doing on LinkedIn and in all your engagements and relationships builds is people have to see you. They have to know who you are. They then have to like what you're saying. So you have to be talking in a certain language and communicating certain messages that people like. Once they start to like your stuff, then they start to trust what you're saying. And once people start to trust what you're saying, then they start to take you seriously when it comes to a hiring decision. So one of the things I encourage people to do on LinkedIn is to have a proactive engagement presence on LinkedIn. So rather than just having a profile that sits there, use status updates to talk about things that are pertinent to your sector, pertinent to your specialisms, communicate your industry knowledge through something called published posts, because people start to see this. Find the groups that are relevant to you. Find the groups where you think employers, just as I used in my example with Neil, would be looking for people with your talent, and then converse in those groups. Don't go in those groups and shout about wanting a job first off. Go in those groups and start to comment on people's posts, start to have discussions of your own, generate discussions, and start to have conversations with people to build relationships online. And you start to build trust with people, and they will see you as a go-to person for your skills and experience. And LinkedIn, trust is hugely important in people's decisions to hire. And LinkedIn offers a number of different vehicles to help you build trust and engagement with a potential employer. Now, the first thing on a LinkedIn profile is you have the opportunity to get recommendations. This is where people you've worked with in the past, worked for in the past, recommend you. That tells me, like an online testimonial, that you're somebody I can trust. Contacts in common. What about if an employer lands on your profile because you create this nice shop window, and they notice that somebody they know is connected to you as a first-tier connection? That gives them an element of trust as well. And in actual fact, they may contact that person who you jointly know as part of their peer conversation when they're looking to hire and say, I've seen you're connected to this person on LinkedIn. Can you tell me a bit more? I'm interested in having a conversation with them. And this is why on LinkedIn it's important to build your connection base on a daily basis. And of course, publish posts. If you talk about what's happening in your industry, if in the aerospace sector, you talk about what's going on in the aerospace sector, and you publish online blogs, not only on your profile, but in the groups that you've identified as to where employers and recruiters may be looking for people with your talent, then you've got a good chance that people are going to see you and find you more visible. So think about LinkedIn, think about your positioning on LinkedIn, and think about your communication cycle. I mentioned very earlier on in the presentation today something I call the Jobseeker dichotomy, and I'll explain that very, very briefly as we have time. The Jobseeker dichotomy is something I came up with, and it's a framework for success in the job market, and it's a framework to govern your thinking and also your communications. And the first part of the Jobseeker dichotomy says that your success in the job market is solely down to you. It's about you taking personal responsibility. It's nothing to do with anybody else. So that means if you believe the right things, think the right things, and take the right action, then you'll get the result. You can't rely on other people. So it's about taking personal responsibility. The second element of the Jobseeker dichotomy, which is relevant to what we've just spoken about, is that in all communications with employers, recruiters, market makers, anybody, in the first instance, and that's the important point, in the first instance, it's never about you. It's always about them. So it should never be about you wanting a job. It should always be about them. And a very quick example, when people send cover letters to employers to try and open lines of communication, if they're looking for a job, the temptation is to start that cover letter with, I'm looking for a job, please find attached my CV. But immediately it disengages the potential employer, and it doesn't stand out from everybody else's cover letter. What about if you'd researched that business and you knew that business had won an important contract, or you'd heard a talk by the owner of that business, or you'd read something in the press or media where the owner of the business was commenting, and you use that as your opening paragraph? That's the grabber. That gets their attention, and that builds this see me, like me, trust me, hire me mentality, and it gets you through this first filter, whereby people will take you more seriously because you've stood out from the competition from the off. Okay, I think we're bang on time actually, which is good. So we're bang on the 45-minute presentation. So that concludes the formal presentation today. What I direct you to is if you'd like more information on Career Codex, my business Career Codex, if you go to careercodex.com, I publish a weekly newsletter which goes out. I put out a lot of free content, a lot of free education. If you go to my website, scroll down to the bottom right-hand side of any of the pages, there will be an opportunity to give your name and email address to sign up, and delivered into your inbox fairly swiftly, hopefully, will be my free guide, which talks about the 5 things successful job seekers know that others don't, which just build on some of the concepts and education I've given you today. I also have a Twitter handle at Career Codex. If you follow on there, any webinars, any online events that I'm running, any content I tend to put out through there. And if you also head to Facebook, facebook.com/Career Codex, if you'd like to like the page or leave any comments there or any questions there, I'll be able to catch up with those later. So hopefully we've covered a lot today, by the way. We've covered a lot. We've covered the overview of the Career Codex framework and focus specifically on environment, and a little bit of process with the LinkedIn stuff. But hopefully, looking at the screen in front of me, Astrid, we have some questions from people that I can answer now.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. That's extremely insightful, and we really appreciate your thoughts. I liked particularly your analogy of your brain being like Google, and if you think negative thoughts, it will return negative results. And conversely with positive, I like that very much. So it's all about very much being very proactive, a lot of psychology there, having a very clear goal as to what you want to achieve. And it was very interesting also the way you talked about, working with your peers and communicating with different audiences, especially on LinkedIn. And we've actually had quite a few questions come in on LinkedIn. So if I just quickly have a look at the folder, so people are saying, how can they be more proactive on LinkedIn? Also, you've mentioned a lot about sort of approaching people in a very professional manner when you're sort of doing sort of speculative inquiries. So have you any more thoughts on sort of being more proactive within LinkedIn, how that works, and how you sort of approach people in a professional and correct way?
Absolutely. So I covered a little bit of this in the presentation, but just to reinforce the message, the first thing you need to think about doing on LinkedIn is this should be a daily activity. So on a daily basis, you're looking to connect with people on LinkedIn and to build a connection base, because the more connections you have, the more visible you are to potentially recruiters and employers, and also the more you can see. So if you want to target a particular employer, you can actually go out and see them, because there's these first tier, second tier, and third tier connections of visibility on there. To be more proactive on LinkedIn, it's about conversation. Okay, so having a I'll use an analogy here. I like analogies. Just having a profile on LinkedIn is like walking into a networking event and not talking to anybody. Okay, it doesn't work. So LinkedIn, thinking about this networking analogy, what you have to do is when you go to a networking event, you have to talk to people in the room. So it's exactly the same on LinkedIn. You have to have conversations. And groups are LinkedIn's secret weapon to have conversations with people that may hire you, or with recruiters that are looking in those groups, as I did to find Neil, my IT auditor, is to have conversations and position yourself as somebody who's knowledgeable on your sector, who people can talk to potentially about opportunities further down the line. So that's what you need to do on LinkedIn. In terms of approaching employers directly, as I used the 2 examples from the finance directors of the businesses I interviewed for my podcast, well, providing you approach in a professional way, and providing you talk about their business first and not just about the fact that you're looking for a job, so you take an interest in their business first using the second part of the job seeker dichotomy, then you're going to get a receptive response. If somebody knocked on my door in my business and said to me, the first thing they said was, I'm looking for a job, well, they're not going to capture my attention. But if somebody phoned me up and said, Simon, I've seen you in the press, I've followed your LinkedIn feeds, I've seen you did this presentation, it was really interesting, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this, this, and this, and we got into a conversation, and it transpired in that conversation they were looking for a job, I'll be more likely to take them seriously in terms of my recruitment strategy moving forward. Does that answer your question?
hopefully that does answer the question. I mean, people are asking things like, when you say contact people daily, sort of how often should I do that? People are also asking, once I have my list of connections on LinkedIn, how often should you contact them? I think essentially what Simon's saying is sort of making the most of the contacts that you have and sort of approaching them in a sort of professional, structured way in terms of if you see a contact that you think might be useful, as Simon was saying, perhaps just drop them a line and say, oh, I noticed that you've been doing some work in this particular area. I'm interested in moving into that area. Would you, could we have a conversation? Can I direct message you, etc.? So it sounds as if what Simon's saying is sort of make the most of the connections you have on LinkedIn, and the groups in particular are very powerful. Quick plug for the ACCA official groups. We have official LinkedIn groups for members in the UK. We also have sector-specific LinkedIn groups too. So if you had a particular sector interest, join those groups, have those conversations, and as Simon was saying, make those connections. We've got a couple more questions here in terms of the hidden market. So do you think that the hidden market is significantly weaker in the public or government sector, or do the same things apply across all sectors?
That's a very, very, very good question. And what I would say on that, the hidden market exists everywhere, okay, because we all have conversations with people we know and trust when we're looking to hire, because it's a faster process. If we get recommended somebody, it comes with that implicit recommendation, and it's a lower cost strategy. In the public sector, there is likely to be more governance surrounding procurement policy and recruitment policy, because recruiting somebody is a procurement thing at the end of the day. So there may be certain channels and certain things that they have to go down. So they might have to go out to a job board, or they might have to go out to a recruiter. But what I can tell you, even if they're going out to a job board and a recruiter, the conversations in the hidden market are still happening. They're still happening. And if you had a choice to position yourself in front of an employer in the private sector or the public sector, and you wanted to stand out, if you position yourself in the hidden market and were having a conversation through that medium where there's an implicit recommendation, that is more powerful, and that is more about standing out than being recommended in through a third-party website or third-party recruiter. So it exists. How big it is, always difficult to say because it's hidden. That's the whole point. But it definitely exists in the public sector as well as the private sector.
Okay, thank you, Simon. We've a couple more questions here. One, I think, is looking more at the sort of urgency of a job search. So say, for example, somebody is currently not working, they're looking for a job, they're unemployed, and they've got finances to last them, say, 3 months. So it's quite an urgent situation. Do you think that you would behave in a different way with your job search, or in terms of sense of urgency, how would you act differently in that scenario?
Okay, so if you've been made redundant and you're in the job market full time, then you have more time to dedicate to your job search. So I talk about there's two types of time when it comes to job search. There's something called calendar time, which is the amount of time it probably takes somebody at your particular level and in your industry space to find a job. The best way to understand what calendar time looks like, you talk to a recruiter and say, look, based on my level, based on my seniority, based on my sector, how long roughly does it take? And that might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. With regard to this particular question, we're talking about a 3-month window. So if you know that it's going to take you 6 months, then you've got to budget accordingly in terms of your finances. And it might mean that you go out and get some part-time work, some temporary work to tide you over while you find the job that you really, really want. The other element of time is investment time. So if I'm in a full-time job looking for my next job, I might have an hour every day to dedicate to my job search. If I've been made redundant and I'm at home, I've got 7.5 hours a day. I said right at the start of my presentation that successful job search is a profession. And if you treat it as a profession, you get a result. So while if you've got a 3-month window, but you're not working and you've got a lot of time to dedicate to your job search, you're going to get a faster result than if you had you wanted to get a job within 3 months and you're currently working. So you have to be sensible about it. You have to be realistic in terms of your timescales. If there's a budgeting issue, getting some temporary work, which can open doors in terms of networking and marketing, is important. So time is very, very important. Having realistic time is important.
Okay, thank you, Simon. We have another question, I think, around sort of how you go around raising your profile. Somebody's just asked, would you recommend sort of sharing relevant content or writing content on your LinkedIn groups to get noticed? So you write an article on a particular topic, you're seen as an authority in that area. Is that maybe a strategy that you could use?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you a story. I like stories. So one of my career Codex clients, very senior executive in the aerospace sector, and he had his LinkedIn shop window, so he wasn't doing anything with it. And I said to him, what I want you to do between now and our next session is write a published post on LinkedIn. I want you to talk about the 5 things that you're observing in the aerospace sector that are important, that if somebody read that, who was either a recruiter in the aerospace sector or an employer in the aerospace sector, would find interesting. And I think it would be fair to say that he thought, well, why is he asking me to do this? This isn't going to work. And he did it. So he did it. He positioned that in certain groups. He communicated that out to some of his connections. And the amount of likes and shares that he got of that content on LinkedIn immediately raised his profile. So people can like it to say, wow, that's great, or they can share it with their contacts. So absolutely, blogging, published posts on LinkedIn is hugely important. Video is even more important. I'm not suggesting you go out and do a video of yourself, but if you did, if you do something like I'm doing today to talk about something you know about, position that correctly online, this stuff sticks around and people read it and they can find you as a result.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we just got time for just one more question. I've got a question here that's talking about CVs again and LinkedIn profiles, but it's really asking if there are gaps in your CV or in your LinkedIn profile in terms of your working and employment history. How detrimental can they be? Even if you can explain why they've come up, how detrimental can these gaps appear to be?
Okay, it's a really, really, really good question, one I get asked a lot. The first thing to say is it depends why there's a gap, and it depends how long that gap is. You have to be in a position to explain that gap. And this comes back to the psychology side of things, the second element of the Career Codex methodology, because the gap to you might mean something negative. You may have been out of work for whatever reason, and you might believe that's a negative thing to communicate through your CV or through your LinkedIn profile or face-to-face at interview. So you have to challenge your beliefs. When I used to advise, well, when I still do advise, but when I advise my clients on gaps on CV, I get to look for the positives of those gaps. If they weren't working, let's assume they weren't working for whatever reason, what else were they doing? Were they volunteering? Did they do a course? Did they do anything, do some charity work, whatever? Providing they were inactive, providing they were active and can communicate that, then that's fine. And they need to have, to do well at interview, you need to become a great storyteller. So you explain it. This is the reason I have the gap. This is what I did during that gap. And this was the positive outcome of having that time away from employment, if that's the reason for the gap.
Okay, now that's excellent. And I think also, as you say, it does go back to the psychology, doesn't it, in terms of sort of positioning it very positively and it can, as you say, be a benefit, sort of the experience that you gained in that particular gap. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon. We've come to the end of our time.
Thank you.
Just a quick reminder about the resource centre that we have here on the webinar. You'll find there links to Simon's website, but also to our careers board. So if you're feeling inspired to go and get your profile out there, please do register with our careers board. We've also got a link there to our online finance training, ActiveX, if you're interested perhaps in suggesting that to contacts and colleagues if they want to get involved in the finance profession. The recording will also be available on demand, so if you are wanting to listen to the presentation at a later stage, you will be able to do so. Thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you very much for your participation. We hope that you've enjoyed this first in the series of 21 webinars that we're providing for members. And I hope that you found it useful. Simon, as he said, is on LinkedIn. So if you want to contact him via LinkedIn, I'm sure he'd be happy for you to do that. He's nodding and smiling.
Feel free to connect. Absolutely.
So that's great. And so thank you all very much.